What's up guys, you're watching Li-Fi TCG. This video is going to be a quick recap of my tournament at GP Niagara Falls, where I played Blue-Black Death Shadow to a 10-5 record, which was good for 94th place and $250. So I'll just quickly go through the list as well as the matches. So okay, so previously the videos that I've uploaded have been with Death Shadow playing Delver of Secrets as well. So the threat package is like 4 Shadow, 4 Delver, and then 2 Delve creatures. So Ben Friedman wrote an article, it's probably a couple of months old now, where he sort of says that the Delver is not the right threat for the deck. You don't have any burn spells, so you never end up in the situation where you can effectively like bolt your opponent as a time walk. You know, you're attacking with Mongoose or you're attacking with Delver, it's 3 damage per turn. Suddenly you like finish your opponent off with a flurry of bolts while you're like constraining their mana. Obviously you can't do that with this deck because you don't have burn spells. It's way more often that you play a threat that's like a 5/5 Delve creature or a Shadow, which can be like 7/7 or 8/8, and it just crushes in. So it doesn't really make much sense to have like a tiny cheap 3/3 creature alongside that. You're more like a control deck where you have these big finishes that require a little bit more setup, and then they're strong enough to like just win the game by themselves. You don't need any Delver alongside it. Like you just want to basically trade cards efficiently with the opponent with like your Thoughtseizes and stuff, rather than try and tempo your opponent out with things like Stifle. So that's kind of the list that I used. It's the list I use at the GP, and it's the list I use at a few practice tournaments leading up to the event, and I think it makes a lot of sense. So I'll go run through the list really quickly right now. So I have 4 Death Shadow and 4 Street Wraith. I've seen some people trying to cut Street Wraith, but I don't think it's correct. There's quite a few matchups where you bought it out, but I think it's too good to both to like dig through a deck faster, which is sort of relevant. That feeds Delve quickly. You can reanimate it to increase the turn 1 threat density count because we're not playing Delver anymore, and in some matchups that is the effect that you want. And it just helps you like turbo damage yourself versus combo. So I wouldn't cut any Street Wraith. And then the thing that sets it apart mostly from the Delver version is 2 Jace Vryn's Prodigy. So basically this is like Snapcaster Mage, but you can divide the mana across multiple turns. So if you want to flashback him to Tourach with Jace, it still costs 4 mana in total, but you don't have to pay it all at once. So you can rely on having a really low land count like the Delver decks, but you have the ability to like gain card advantage and trade resources really effectively, kind of like a Grixis control deck. And this is a pretty powerful angle to have access to. So I quite like the Jace Vryn's Prodigies, and I think they suit the deck better than Delver of Secrets. And then I'm still playing 2 Tombstalker as the last threats, like the Delve threats, rather than Angler. A lot of people seem very skeptical of this card, but especially in the version where you have Jace and you're trying to cast him to Tourach and stuff, having the extra mana requirement isn't so relevant, especially when you're not playing Stubborn Denial. So you never have to worry about like casting Tombstalker and leaving a mana up to protect either it or yourself with a Stubborn Denial, because you're not playing them. So the opportunity cost of costing 1 extra black mana isn't as high as it would be in some other builds of the deck, because we're kind of keeping that consideration in mind. And the flying is super relevant versus things like True Name Nemesis or opposing Delvers or opposing Terramanders, or Storm Chaser Mage is another one that's been relevant, or like the entire Elves deck. I really think that Tombstalker has, with this build, I think Tombstalker has really proved herself over Mag Angler. Now onto the spells. So counters, we've got 4 Force of Will and 4 Daze. Friedman trimmed a Daze down to 3, I guess because he thinks that like he doesn't want to play like a Delver deck, so Daze is going to be less good, but I think Daze is still too strong. Like being able to pick up your own Watery Graves and stuff is a really powerful angle that Daze gives you in some situations, and just having like the 0 mana counter that doesn't put you down in cards is just too strong. So yeah, I wouldn't cut Daze. I think 4 and 4 is still mandatory basically. Oops. Then the cantrips. So 4 Brainstorm, 4 Ponder, and 2 Preordain. So basically the way I think of the Preordain is that like 2 Preordain and 2 Jace basically replace Delver. That's kind of how I would look at this. So having the increased consistency of more cantrips is good in most games. If you have a good read on the metagame, you can cut the Preordains for more removal, or perhaps like another discard spell or another counter if you think you have like a confident read on what kind of card you're going to want in most matchups. But I think the 2 Preordain is really good. It's just and also it's just another card that cycles, so it helps you flip your Jace and it helps fill the graveyard for Delve. I think 2 Preordain is pretty nice, especially because you don't have the you have a slightly lower density of turn 1 plays because you're not playing Delver, so having the extra cantrip is pretty good. Then the discard, so we have 3 Hymn to Tourach and 4 Thoughtseize. So Hymn to Tourach is really strong. The problem is that it's kind of a bad top deck in a lot of spots because your opponent will be Hellbent or they'll only have 1 card, and they have diminishing returns, right? Because the more Hymn to Tourachs you draw, the more likely your opponent's going to be Hellbent, so the extra copies are less likely to be useful. So while it is a really powerful card, and I don't think 4 is too bad necessarily, I think 3 is better. I wouldn't cut it down to less than 3, and if you wanted to play 4 just to have the more consistent access to it, I wouldn't fault you too much for that either. And of course 4 Thoughtseize is mandatory, like the life loss and the power of Thoughtseize is just too strong. Then the removal, we have 2 Dismember and 1 Fatal Push. Friedman plays 3 Dismember. I think that's maybe a little bit too much life loss, and Fatal Push just gives you some extra utility. For example, in the mirror, like killing opposing shadows, no questions asked, is pretty powerful, as well as in other matchups, things like Knight of the Reliquary, for example. And just when you have Jace to flashback your spells and cantrips to help find them, having the variety can you get rewarded for having a bit of variety in more situations than you would otherwise. So I like this mixture. If you have a read on the metagame, you can play more removal, like 1 extra Dismember as well as this or something, but if you only want 3, then I like 2 Dismember, 1 Fatal Push. Then we have 3 miscellaneous spells. We have 1 Liliana, 2 Reanimate. As some of you might recall, if you watch my previous videos, I used to play a Darkblast main deck, which I think is a very good card, but there were just a few times where I just got a little bit punished because it didn't do anything. So Liliana gives you that repeatable -1 effect at an obviously higher mana cost, but it also helps with the problem of having a bit low threat density once you cut the Delvers. Like, your only real ways of winning the game are the Shadow and the Tombstalker, and arguably the Reanimate. So having the Liliana as like that sort of Darkblast repeatable minus effect, plus the extra threat with the emblem, and in general just being a much stronger card with the option to return extra creatures or wraiths from the graveyard with the -2 ability, meant that I was pretty happy playing one Liliana. I wouldn't play more than one main deck because firstly it's like legendary, and then it's a 3-drop, right, so it makes the mana curve of the deck go up quite a bit. So only one is good, but I think that card's solid. And then 2 Reanimate. So I think this card is pretty solid. Against the Stoneblade decks, one of the best plays you can make against them is discarding their true name and then reanimating it. And then additionally, even though you've cut Delvers, like that turn 1 drop, turn 2 like Daze Wasteland plan is one of the best angles of attack against certain decks, like Cloud Post for example. So being able to still reanimate your Street Wraith on turn 1 is a relevant plan to have access to, and it just gives you some powerful angles versus like reanimated decks, or you can discard your opponent's Reality Smasher or Ulamog for example and then reanimate that. And you know, it's just like the life loss tool to help power up your Shadow and things like that. So to be honest, if you wanted to play a version of this deck like with the Jace and no Delvers, I really like every spell in my main deck except for maybe the second Reanimate, but I don't know what I would cut for it, or what I would cut it for. Perhaps another removal spell like the second Fatal Push, or you could play maybe one spell Pierce main deck. You know, that's really the only thing that I've noticed with this list, is that the second Reanimate is maybe a little bit clunky, but I don't even know if that's true or not. Maybe 2 Reanimates is good. So yeah, I'm really happy with the spells, but this is just the one area that I would focus on if you're looking to tune it up. So then onto the lands. 2 Underground Sea and 4 Watery Grave. I always thought this was correct, because some people have been playing a split of 3 and 3. I have come up against a few more situations now where I wanted the 3rd Underground Sea, but overall I think this split is still correct, 2 and 4, just because you can sort of play around having 4 Watery Graves by like end of turn fetching one in tapped or something if you want to avoid the life loss, and having access to the repeatable, having more life loss sources helps you versus the Plowshares decks. What I'm saying is that in the end I still think this is correct, but I'm less heavily in favour of it than I was previously. So if you want to play 3 and 3, then I wouldn't like totally fault you for that. And in a meta game where a lot of people are playing like Grixis or Blue-Red Delver, that's probably correct. But I think overall I still think this is better, and I only own 2 Underground Seas as well, so I'm unlikely to be playing anything different anytime soon. And then we have 3 Wastelands, because the Wastelands are less good when you don't have the Delver draws. It's just a tool to help you sort of make the post deck stumble a bit or kill a Maze or something. And then we have the 7 fetch lands again. So, oh no, sorry, 8 fetch lands. So 2 Polluted Delta, and then 3 black fetch lands, 3 of the other black fetch lands, and then 3 of the blue fetch lands, just to split them all so you play around Pithing Needle effects, or people will weirdly try and like surgical your Polluted Deltas or all kinds of stupid bullshit. One of my opponents thought that I had like a fetch land split that was favoured towards black, so he thought that I was playing like a basic swamp, but he must have just seen like Verdant Catacombs into Watery Grave or something. Yeah, so but that seemed to incentivize him to like maybe not bring in Blood Moons or something. I can't remember what the exact conversation was, but I wouldn't worry about that. I just think that avoiding Spyglass and all of those effects is the most important thing, so I would always play the biggest split you could get your hands on. So that's the main deck. In the sideboard we have 3 Surgical, 3 Ratchet Bomb, 3 Diabolic Edict. So 3 Surgical, I think you want at least 3 Graveyard Hates. You can't play... I think Cage is very good. Like, if I was playing Rug Delver and I wanted 3 pieces of Graveyard Hate, I would play like 2 Surgical and 1 Cage. But you can't play Cage with Jace, because obviously Cage turns off Jace. So 3 Surgicals it is. If you expect a lot of Reanimator, then you can add another piece of Graveyard Hate, but I don't think that's necessary. That's already quite a decent matchup anyway. Then 3 Diabolic Edict. So it's very good versus depths and just in general, like the fair decks. If you kill a Stoneforge with it, that's fine, and obviously it also kills True Name and things like that. Going forward, you obviously want to instantly replace these with 3 Liliana's Triumph. Like Lawrence Harmon kind of went on this like big brain rant about how like being able to target yourself means that Liliana's Triumph isn't strictly better, but all of his examples were like really daft, you know, like, oh, what if Gristlebrand blocks your guy and then you can eat your own creature to prevent the life gain? Well, guess what? You can just Liliana's Triumph and make them sacrifice the Gristlebrand, right? Like, you have to come up with such contrived nonsense to justify Diabolic Edict over Liliana's Triumph. Like, if your deck had Academy Rector or like Veteran Explorer or something in it, then in that case, you know, you can make an argument that Diabolic Edict might be better. But in this deck, we would never ever want to like sacrifice your own creature in any common situation, and you're even playing Liliana's to get the additional bonus of the discard off. Yeah, just immediately replace these 3 with the new Liliana's Triumph, and then 3 Ratchet Bomb. So this is kind of a contentious sideboard slot. Of course, the original build from Utter Leighton played Throne of Geth, with the idea being that you proliferate up your opponent's Chalice of the Void, and that's better than destroying it. Obviously that's not true in this version because Jace costs 2 mana and so does him to Tourach, and it's basically impossible to like come up with a sideboard configuration that lets you proliferate up your opponent's Chalice onto 2 and then not have it mess with all the rest of your 2-drops. Of course, the Raptor build didn't have Jace and him and things like that, so it was less punishing. So basically, if you are playing a build with no him and no Jace, and you're playing like Delvers and Stubborn Denial and stuff, then I think the new card, what is it? I think it's called like Contentious Plan. It's just a one in a blue sorcery, draw a card, proliferate. Like, I think that card is actually totally reasonable. It just means that you know, you're much softer to cards like Blood Moon or Ensnaring Bridge, but maybe that's okay because it's pretty difficult for you to beat those cards regardless. I've definitely used Bomb versus things like Ensnaring Bridge, and it's definitely helped me to win the game. And it's also good to have what's effectively extra removal versus the aggressive decks like Vryn and Delver, for example, because you do have quite a lot of life loss cards that you want to be able to board out. And if you just play this and then it like ticks up once and then blows up a Pteramander or something, that's like totally fine, considering that you really want to be boarding out all your Wraiths and even probably your Thoughtseizes and things like that in those matchups. So overall, I think I'm still going to be sticking with Bomb, and I think 3 is a pretty good number. So these cards I kind of consider as like core to the sideboard. Of course, with the Liliana's Triumph instead of Edict. Just make sure you plan the numbers out, so when you're boarding in, you're making full use of all your, when you're sideboarding in all the different matchups, you're making full use of your sideboard slots. Then the other 6 sideboard cards, so I have the 1 Darkblast here in the sideboard. It's very, very good against any decks relying on small creatures, so Delver and Elves and Death and Taxes. Then we have 1 extra Liliana, so it's another threat versus the control decks, and it's also another source of removal versus the fear decks with small creatures. Definitely a solid option. Then we have 1 Spell Pierce. So generally you don't need too much extra anti-combo hate because you have so much combo hate in your main deck with like Hymn to Tourach and counter spells and Thoughtseize and stuff like that. But you do have those removal spells that you need to board out. So basically how I see it is that the deck wants to have 1 kind of anti-spell. What I mean by that is like an anti-combo kind of slot. And I think Spell Pierce is the best just because it also has applications against fair matchups where it counters Planeswalkers and also weird like enchantments and things like that. It's just the most broad option when matchups where you want to be boarding out your Fatal Pushes and your Dismembers. So I think that I'm pretty happy with the 1 Spell Pierce. Then 1 Infernal Contract. I kind of joked about this card in previous videos as like a sort of silly, over the top, like haha, it must be good with Death Shadow, right? It makes you lose half your life. But this card actually is really quite strong. You don't want to board it in against any deck with Burn, basically, because you can go down on life way too quickly. But against any deck playing Tundra, pretty much, this is one of the best cards you can possibly have. So they don't pressure your life total enough for you to have to worry about dying to this. The one exception is like weird flash situations with Mendelian Clique and sometimes Snapcaster Mage, which you have to be a little bit careful about. But in general, the Tundra decks have no reach, so no matter what life total you're on, as long as you're above like 4, then paying life to draw 4 is just insanely strong. Because the problem with a deck like Miracles, for example, is imagine they AK and they draw 4 cards. Like so many of those cards are just going to be more cantrips or just like air. But with this deck, basically, or you know, they're playing like more lands than you, things like that. But with this deck, when you draw 4, like so many of those cards are likely to be gas. And of course, versus like a Stoneblade deck where you 1-for-1 with the opponent a lot because you're boarding in all your edicts and things like that. Suddenly drawing 4 cards can just be totally backbreaking. I wouldn't board it in versus Death and Taxes because it's as a 3-mana sorcery, it's too difficult to cast. And the other thing is that against combo, I think it's too slow. So against things like Sneak and Show and Storm, I'm not boarding this card in anymore. But against things like Enchantress, I do bring it in because they don't pressure your life total and you need their help to find more counters. So it does have some few other fringe applications, but it's mostly for beating the Tundra decks. And I think spending a sideboard slot on that for those matchups is worth it, because otherwise I think the deck is quite soft to like Snapcaster plus Sword Splashes. But when you have effects like this, you can easily grind through it. So I do think playing 1 sideboard slot on Infernal Contract is worth it. Then the other 2 slots are removal. So we have 1 Toxic Deluge and 1 Dread of Night. So Dread of Night is obviously the best card versus Death and Taxes, and it also has applications versus Miracles because it stops Monastery Mentor tokens. And then Toxic Deluge is just like a Wrath, basically. So it's good versus all the different creature decks, pretty much. Young Pyro, Thalia, even Eldrazi, Elves, of course. Yeah, so it's just a board wipe. So I think the Contract, the Pierce, and the Liliana and the Darkblast are like confidently included in the sideboard, and then these last two cards are a little bit more flexible. So I do think that they need to be removable, but depending on the matchups you expect to face, there are a lot of different options you could consider. Like you could play a second Darkblast instead of the Dread of Night, for example, if you expect Daubedix and Young Pyromancers and things like that to be more popular. Or one option I've considered as well is Engineered Plague. So it's obviously good against the tribal decks, but a lot of the time it's kind of just like a Marsh Casualties that Ixalan's Bindings, the thing that you hit with it. So for example, you just play Engineered Plague naming Merfolk to kill a true name, and then their true name dies and they can't play any more true names. So, or you know, the same deal, you can name Human versus Delver and Young Pyro, or you know, naming Human against Death and Taxes is obviously not as good as Dread of Night because it doesn't kill Flicker Wisp and also it costs 3 mana, but it's still something that you would board in. And of course, the other option, Marsh Casualties, like I just mentioned, or you could even play more Fatal Push, things like, or something like that. So it just depends whether, but for example, all of those other cards aren't very good against, say, Eldrazi because all their creatures are too big. That's a matchup where Toxic Deluge is much better. These are just all the things that you have to weigh. Like what matchups do you think are harder for you to win, and what percentage of the metagame do you think they're all going to be? So things like that. That's what I would consider when taking this deck to a tournament. Like these two slots are definitely the most flexible. So yeah, that was the entire list. I'll just run through the matches really. Oops. Got my new MagicFest playmat from the Verdant package at that GP. So I can't remember. I don't make very comprehensive notes. So on the Friday I played in the PTQ, or I guess the MCQ is what it's called now. I played Joe Lissette in round 1. He was still playing Breakfast. I don't know if he played it in the main event or not, but I beat him 2-1. Then Depths in round 2, I beat him as well. I think, was this the, did I play against Depths in the main event as well? Or was that the game? Yeah, so against this Depths opponent, it was kind of funny, because I got him down to 2. What was he? I think he was paying life for Dark Confidant or something. So he got down to a really low life. But I just hardcast. I played Liliana, and then I returned Street Wraith with it, and then I hardcast it. And then he didn't have the combo able to assemble on board that turn, and he had swamps out with Urborg, so he had no way of blocking the Street Wraith. I thought that was pretty funny. So 2-0, and then against Show and Tell, he just turn 1 Emrakul'd me on the play. No, maybe not on the play, I can't tell. But yeah, so I think in the third game he had Leyline, and I had Edict, and then he Emrakul'd me, but he had a backup Force of Will in his hand, so it wouldn't have mattered anyway in that situation. But I think Leyline is definitely a huge reason why the new Edict, the Liliana's Triumph, is better than Diabolic. So effectively, when you lose a round in the PTQ, you're basically out anyway. Then the next round was against Miracles. This was an unintentional draw. The game went super long. He almost beat my Liliana emblem in game 2, but I got there in the end. The Dread of Night was a huge factor in this, not letting him like overwhelm my board on the way back. Not letting him overwhelm my zombies with monk tokens, and so he had to spend ages finding an answer for this before he could play his mentor, and then that meant he ran out of wraths by that time, and my emblem overwhelmed him. But then in the end we timed out and came through. And then in the last round I just ID'd with my opponent because the EV with 4 prizes was either like slightly higher or the same. as playing, and then we just wanted more time to like go and play in another trial or something. So then I played another trial, or sorry, a first trial for the buys. I played against Lands in round 1, and then I lost immediately because that matchup is not very good. Then in the next trial, I beat Elves. I don't think I've ever lost to Elves playing Death Shadow. Like, this is definitely a matchup that improves a lot compared to Rug when you have way more removal, including like Darkblast and Liliana's, and then him to Tourach is also really good in this matchup as well. Then in the next game, Food Chain, I also won, and then in round 3 I played against like a black-white Dead Guy Ale kind of deck, and I just had like a huge brain explosion in round 1 where I like punted terribly. And then in game 2 my opponent mulliganed a lot, so he like got a little bit frustrated as well and sort of conceded early. And then in game 3 I guess we kind of had like a real game, but I just couldn't get there in the end, so that was the end of the trials, and so I went into the GP with no buys. Round 1 of the GP played against Eldrazi Post, so my opponent was like a little bit inexperienced. I think he tried to search for all his dust off his Eye of Ugin, so I had to just quickly double check that and confirm that does not work. And then on the sort of like in my, but I'm not sure if it was my final turn in time or like second to last, or if time hadn't quite been called yet because we had a short extension. But like I was attacking with 2 shadows, and I was on 2, and he blocked 1 with Embringer, and before damage he pinged me, which put me on 1, and then my other unblocked shadow was exactly lethal. So, but he was a really nice guy. He came up to me like throughout the day and asked me how I was going. I hope that guy had a good weekend, even though he didn't win that round. Then next game it was against Bant Food Chain. I don't really have much to say about this matchup other than the fact that like I'm playing a lot of good cards and he kind of isn't, and then in the end like he just got wrecked by him to Tourach or something. You know, that's kind of how these matchups go, and you just have to accept that like if you're doing something kind of weird in Legacy, you really need a good reason to be doing that. I know some people don't like that, you know, Brainstorm plus him to Tourach plus Thoughtseize or whatever is good, and that it's too simple or obvious or whatever, but if you want to win, then you got to do what you got to do, and it's definitely not like an autopilot free win deck or anything. So 2-0 versus Bant Food Chain. Next round, Richter Selva, don't really remember anything about this. 2-0. Blue Red Delver, another 2-0. Next round, round 5, so I'm undefeated right now. I'm playing against Brian Koval, who I've never met before because I don't live in the States, but he seemed pretty cool. He's obviously one of the more well-known Eternal Magic players. He was playing Blue-White Stoneblade, and I beat him 2-1, it looks like. We talked a little bit about like the sideboard plan in game 2, or at the end of the match rather, and I think he was boarding in more like cheap counter magic, like Fluster or Pierce, for example, in an attempt to fight my him to Tourachs. And I think that's correct. I'm not sure what he was boarding out for those, but yeah, when you're able to like 1-for-1 trade with my card advantage stuff, then it's easy to get into a position where you can control the game later with your superior options like Snap Plow and Stoneforge and things like that. So yeah, so that's what, kind of my thoughts on this matchup. And I played against Blade again, and I 2-0'd at that time. I think my opponent had like a kind of clunky draw in game 2. I remember in game 2 I had played Infernal Contract, and I drew like 3 lands and a him to Tourach or something off it. So my opponent was like super depressed after I drew 4, but it like barely improved my hand at all. But yeah, I still think the card is really good, and I just got a little bit unlucky, but he got even more unlucky, I guess, because I think he got flooded as well. Then the next round I lost against Grixis Control. I think I was playing a little bit too loose in this match by like playing out shadows when they're only 2/2s and exposing them to like hold against commands and bolts and things like that, especially in game 1. And then in game 2 I mulliganed, and I thought I was in pretty good control of the game, and then my opponent played like I was on, I think, 8 life or something. Yeah, 8. And then my opponent went like Colligan's Bolt Snap Bolt, like the turn before I was going to kill him. Or no, he had TNN, and then he played like Colligan's Bolt and dealt me exactly 8 damage. So that was a little bit sad, but I think I should have, or could have, increased my chances of winning game 1 quite a bit by just playing a bit tighter. Yeah, people sort of talk about the effect of like, because I was 6-0 at this point, which I think I'm basically locked for day 2, and people sort of talk about the effect where like you sort of play a little bit looser after you've sort of reached your like interim goals for the tournament, and I thought I was like had enough awareness of that and was trying to like play, you know, to my best abilities regardless, but I maybe didn't. So it's an interesting situation to reflect on for next time. Next round, so I'm 6-1. Next round, in fact, I lost 0-2 as well. Game 1, I just kept a hand that was not good in the matchup with like no removal and something a bit slow, like with no disruption, but it had like Jace and cantrips or something like that. And I think I just got run over pretty quickly. And then the second game, I think this was just like a really straight up punt, where my opponent had an Inkmoth and like 1 card in hand, and my hand was like Tombstalker, Wasteland, Liliana, and I knew the top card of my library was another Liliana, and I had no other lands in my hand. So what my plan is to cast the Liliana off the Wasteland, and then like, and the important thing to remember is that I'm on like, I can't remember how many poison, like close to lethal, like a 4 or 5, I think. Well, like my opponent had 2 Hierarchs. Yeah, that might have been what it was. Yeah, I think my opponent had 2 Hierarchs, land, 2 Hierarchs, land, and then an Inkmoth, and they had 1 card in hand, and I was on 4 poison. So my choice is either Wasteland, Inkmoth, cast Tombstalker, or play Liliana, kill 1 Hierarch, and then Wasteland Tombstalker the next turn. So because I knew I had the second Liliana coming, so if I use Wasteland now, I have 2 uncastable cards in my hand. What I chose to do, that was what motivated me to play the Liliana, tapping out my Wasteland and killing 1 Hierarch, but then he untapped and Exalted plus Invigorate, and exactly killed me. I think that was just way too greedy. Like I should have just played the Tombstalker, and then like it puts my opponent on a clock. They have no threats at that point, and also if they play like a Glistener Elf or another Inkmoth, then I can leave it back just to block. And then it's probably within reason that within like a few more turns I'll draw another land for the Lilianas I have. So I think I just made a mistake. Yeah, so I'm now 6-2. And then I won versus Stoneblade again to end the day at 7-2. Yeah, so I seem to have, whatever I'm doing versus Stoneblade, it seems to be working. A lot of people seem to have a lot of trouble with this matchup, but I think that it's pretty good. So, yeah, I think the JVP version has a lot better matchup versus the blue fair decks compared to playing Delvers. The first match on the next day, I played against Eldrazi Post. I think I'd played pretty close to perfectly this game. There was one attack with a Tombstalker I made that was like slightly debatable. But yeah, apart from that, I don't really think there was much I could have done. And then the round after this, I played against Enchantress, which is a horrendous matchup. Choke is very good against you. Carpet of Flowers is very good against you. Elephant Grass is like insane against you. It's unfair how good that card is. It's just very hard to interact with their deck. And this is another matchup where Liliana's Triumph going through Leyline is pretty solid. But yeah, I just got absolutely destroyed. There was no point in any match where my opponent looked like he was going to lose that game. And then I played against Grixis Delver. I think this was more like the version that's like blue-red, just with a small splash for some Bitter Blossom in the sideboard. But I'm doing pretty well versus Delver this tournament as well. Then I played against Eldrazi Post again, and I won this match 2-1. My opponent said that he made a misplay where he played Chalice on a turn where he could have played Trinisphere, and then I either like immediately bombed his Chalice and then like dazed his Trinisphere or something like that, or I bombed his Chalice and then I like Thoughtseized his Trinisphere. Basically, the point was that he should have played the Trinisphere, and I think he recognized that afterwards. So I was lucky to win that match 2-1. Round 14, I played against Sweet deck. It was like a Merfolk deck with Grand Architect. So Grand Architect is basically like a Lord for your Merfolk, obviously, because all your Merfolk are blue, except Mutavault, I guess. But then also it gives you the option of playing like huge Walking Ballistas, which I thought was pretty cool. And of course, having Island Walk is quite strong versus this deck because all their coloured sources are islands. I can't exactly remember how the matches went, but yeah, I managed to get 2-1 over that opponent. And then the last round, I played against, I think it was the same blue-red version as the few rounds ago, like with the mostly blue-red, just with a bit of Blossom Splash. So I think, and I lost this match 2-1, so I think maybe, despite winning most of my other Delver, or actually all of my other Delver matches in that tournament, maybe the third game showed me that I was boarding a little bit too greedy by boarding out too many forces, because I just got like smashed by like Young Pyro into tons of soft counters, and I couldn't resolve any of my like Lilianas or things like that in time, and I just got run over. So I don't know if my opponent just like really nut drew me, or maybe I need to think about keeping some more Force of Wills just to help fight on that like tempo axis a bit better. So yeah, that was the end of the main event at the GP. So that's that. 10-5, which is good for $250 minus like 30% withholding tax or whatever that is. Why? Why do you do this? And I have to figure out how to transfer that over, because I've never made money at a Wizards tournament before. But anyway, we're sorting that out. So then, main event's over. We ran over to the Turbo Town, which is basically just like small two-man queues that they run. So I played against one guy who had a Pox deck, and I beat him 2-1. His version was playing a lot of like Shrieking Afflictions in the rack. I don't think that version's very good in Legacy. I think you want to have extremely minimal number of win conditions and more cards that interact with the opponent, because it's just too easy for you to like, your answers don't like quite line up with your opponent's threats that are much more powerful than yours, and then you can quickly die before your racks kill the opponent. And then just for fun, I said, okay, like I'll play against you again, I'll use the same deck, because he mentioned he had a burn deck, and I said you can use whatever deck you want, so he brought that out, and he was actually splashing for Brainstorm, which I thought was quite cool. So it was like kind of like blue-red Delver, but the blue part was very minimal. I guess he probably had counter spells on the board as well, but I think the main deck he only had Brainstorm as the blue cards. But of course, pretty hard for this deck to beat burn, even after sideboarding. Game 1 it's almost impossible. Like it can be close game 2, but I guess it says here he's on 4, so I guess it was reasonable. But yeah, so 1-1 in the Turbo Town, and then we just played like a fun. The last event of the day when everything's closed except for the prize wall. So I lost this match to Grixis Delver as well, which kind of, this is also contributing to my idea regarding sideboard plans. But, you know, again, maybe I just got a bit unlucky, and the sample size isn't big enough or something like that. Then I lost 2-1 to Maverick, so luckily we didn't do this badly in the GP. I punted the last turn where I wasn't playing to my outs. Like, I had to realize that the only way I could win was drawing exactly Toxic Deluge, and I didn't play in a way that gave me that option. And it was really funny because, like, after I explained that to my opponent after losing, then I flipped the top card and it was the Toxic Deluge. So yeah, you just got to always be aware of what your different options are. Then in the last round I beat Reanimator. He beat me game 1 and then I beat him in the next 2 games. Yeah, so not a bad weekend overall, pretty fun. Oh yeah, I played the same. So then after that, I went to New York City just for like a holiday, and then there was a tournament on Tuesday at what I think is called Montasy Gaming in Manhattan. So there was a short 3-round event, like an FNM style thing there, where I lost to Humans, game 1. That doesn't seem like too good of a matchup. Then I beat Blue Red Delver, I think, yeah, in like a pretty close game. And then I remember my bomb killed us in Steering Bridge, and then I lost to Blue White Spirits. So yeah, like I don't like playing against Thalia. Thalia is not a great matchup. Anyway, you don't really want to care about all my adventures in America, probably. So what I will just end with my final thoughts about the list. So what I think that the Jaces, and to a certain extent the Preordains, do compared to playing Delver of Secrets, like this makes your Fair Blue matchups much better. Stoneblade and Miracles especially, just because your card quality is much higher. I mean, so if this resolves, it's much better than the Delver of Secrets, right? And then the decks like Miracles and Stoneblade are giving you time to play 2 mana cards. So in those matchups, it's better. That's pretty straightforward. In matchups like Delver, it's a bit closer because having Jaces in your deck allows you to play the control role a bit better. So if things are going according to plan, then you're more likely to beat Delver decks with this version. But because you don't have your own Delvers, it's very easy for your opponent to do the thing where they Delver you, like they play a Delver and then they waste you and then they Daze your thing and then you're dying to Delver and then you can't do anything. Whereas if they had played a Delver and you followed it up with your own Delver and then they wasted you, you're kind of more at parity at that point, as opposed to if you like played a Preordain on turn 1 and then they wasted you and now you're like really behind. So I think that this is slightly better versus the Delver decks than having like the pseudo Delver mirror, but there are some games that you will lose to Delvers that you might not have lost if you were playing your own Delvers, if that makes sense. So, and then versus combo, I think either way is good enough, you know, when you have Shadow and Tombstalker and things like that. So obviously Tombstalker is slightly worse versus combo compared to Angler just because it costs more, but I don't think that actually is relevant too often, especially when you don't have counter spells that cost mana except for the 1 spell pierce in the sideboard. And then I guess Delver would be like slightly better versus combo, maybe, compared to Jace, but giving you extra flashbacks on your Thoughtseize and things like that is also obviously very good against combo. So I don't think the combo matchup is a very good argument for or against Delvers or Jace, just because the rest of the deck is so good against it already anyway that it doesn't influence the result of the match too much. The place where Delvers are much better is against the decks that are trying to exploit fair blue decks. For example, if you just play a turn 1 Delver and your opponent Blood Moons you on the draw turn 1 or something like that, then maybe they just die to your Delver while you force a will their 1 Ensnaring Bridge or something. That's kind of its situation, because yeah, your Delver just basically gives you like this secret free win button sometimes against decks that aren't playing cheap removal effectively. So that can be an example against the Blood Moon decks. Post is another really good example where it's really hard for this deck to beat an Eye of Ugin because it's difficult to clock them quite so quickly when you don't have Delver. Also, you can't like play a turn 1 threat and then a turn 2 waste and then be ahead on the board still. Like you can play you can play Preordain on turn 1 and then waste on turn 2, but you're not really ahead in any way by doing that. And of course, these kind of decks are basically designed to exploit the fair blue decks with like Eye of Ugin and stuff that just provides infinite card advantage in a way that's really hard to interact with. Then also versus Death and Taxes. Sometimes when you have Delver, you can just go under them. Like you play turn 1 Delver, they play turn 2 Thalia, but then you kill it and now all their removals online, and then they might try and play a Stoneforge, which you dismember, and then your Delver's been attacking them all this time. But when you don't have that cheap option, and you have more cantrips which are like relatively weak versus that deck, because you know Thalia taxes it, and also your Jaces can get bounced by Caracas is like a weird interaction that comes up sometimes. So yeah, having no Delvers I think makes the Death and Taxes matchup worse. But in the opposite side of combo, like maybe that matchup is so bad that like you don't want to use, like whether you're playing Delvers or not, like the win percentage is low enough that maybe you don't really consider it either way. I'm not sure. But yeah, so that's kind of the argument from like the Delver version versus the Jace version. So, but even then, when I say the Delver version, of course, a lot of people will be thinking that of the Angler plus Stubborn Denial, like basically the Josh Utter Layton main deck. And when I say the Jace versus Jace Vryn's Prodigy version, people might be thinking of the exact Ben Friedman version, which is also playing Stubborn Denial and what's Friedman playing main deck? Stubborn Denial and Angler, right? But of course you can do like a hybrid version, right, where you can play, like these can be Delvers, and you can still play for him to Tourach, and it kind of gives you the option of like the best of both worlds situation maybe, where you have the turn 1 pressure against the decks where that's what you want, but you also have the option of like grinding versus the fair decks with him to Tourach. So that is basically the version that I've had success with in the past, and you can check out my previous videos. And that maybe that's like quite good, because I'm not sure that I really think Stubborn Denial or 1 mana counter magic is necessarily what this deck wants to be doing. So you can also consider that as like a viable alternative to playing the Raptor version or the Friedman version. You can like hybridize it. So yeah, that's my closing thoughts on Death Shadow. So I still think the deck is overall like quite strong. You just have to be a little bit careful in metagames where people are trying to exploit the fair blue decks. In metagames where everybody is playing fair blue decks or they're playing combo, I think this is one of the best decks you can possibly be playing. It's just playing basically all of the most efficient, best cards that blue-black has to offer, which is obviously one of the best combinations in Legacy. So I gotta thank Kaiser again for lending me some cards. I think the Bloodstained Mire, the 2 Japanese Surgicals, and the Toxic Deluge, so thanks for that. Then unfortunately my luggage was lost, which had some of my other cards in it. I think the airline's still working to find that, but it's not looking too promising right now. So I'll try and rebuild some of those, like the Pauper decks for example, which aren't too expensive, and get back on making that content for you guys as well. I think that the new Obnixilis Cruelty is really nice for the Teachings deck. Before you had to play Complete Disregard in your sideboard because the Edict removal was so bad versus Stormbound Geist. So now having basically a Complete Disregard that also kills Gurmag Angler is an extremely good option to have. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good boost to that deck. I no longer think that Putrid Leech is good in Tortured Existence. That's definitely going to be a video at some point. It just doesn't line up very well versus the rest of the format. Because a lot of the premier threats are 5/5, like Gurmag Angler. And I sort of make the argument that against decks like Tron, for example, having an aggressive threat is worth having. But actually what I've found is that the 4/4 Leech is one too small, not only against Anger obviously, but also against things like Mnemonic War. Of course it kills Mnemonic War, because 4 power beats 4 toughness, but actually what you want is Rat's activations for 4, because it not only clears the way for any other bigger creatures you might have, but it also allows you to disrupt things like the Flicker engine, because you can Rats for 4 at instant speed to wipe the board in response. So that's not good with Putrid Leech obviously, because if you Rats for 4 your Leech will die. So I think that what you actually want is slightly slower but even bigger threats. So for example your own Anglers, or even Rhizome Lurcher, which is what I dismissed when it first came out, but I think that playing maybe 1 or 2 copies of that is actually a solid choice right now. And then for Burn and Pauper, I think Stagger Shock is a really underrated card, even main deck. You can pretty reliably get to 3 mana every game, so you don't really have to worry about combo killing your opponent super fast with really cheap burn spells. For example, if you think about Curse of the Pierced Heart, in most matchups, how much damage are you expecting that card to do to your opponent? Are you really expecting to sit and play with your Curse for 4 turns? I mean, in some matchups, yes, but is that really the most common? I think no. Especially because a lot of the matchups a lot of the matchups in Pauper with playing Burn, you're not trying to be the control role, you're trying to be the aggressive role to kill them before they loop Lone Missionaries or even Rift Watchers, or before they find a Circular Protection Red, things like that. So the 3 mana 4 damage from Stagger Shock, only taking 1 extra turn, is a really solid option to have, and I don't think you get punished almost at all for the fact that it costs 3, and it even works quite well with Skewer the Critics, for example, because you have an upkeep damage for free, like with Rift Bolt, and it gives you 2 triggers for your Thermo Alchemist as well. So, and even if you want to play the control role, for example, you can Stagger Shock your opponent's face, and then on the way back you can use it to kill a Delver or something. It's just a quite high, powerful, flexible card, and I think the mana curve can tolerate it. So that's something I really want to explore more. And also I have some interesting ideas for the Burn sideboard, because I don't think people are making optimal uses of their 15 slots there, and people are just sort of following the herd and copying what's already been done. So hopefully either my bag will turn up in the mail, or I'll have to rebuy all of those, but not too big of a deal really, I guess. Yeah, so that'll be all for this video. I might brew some new decks in Legacy just for fun. Modern is something I haven't touched in a long time, just because with the death of PPTQs, there haven't really been any big tournaments for it. There's a standard MCQ coming up. I don't know if I'm going to play in that or not. I just sold all of my Teferis recently, so I don't really want to rebuy those just to play like Esper for one tournament. It seems a little bit silly. But yeah, so I think that's all for today. Thanks for watching. Send a like, subscribe, comment, whatever you feel like. And I hope you check out the next video. This is LifeITCG signing out.